Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tiki Bar. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Haley Katsman. She is the Vice President of Global Strategic Accounts at Highspot. She is saying that spring has sprung in Seattle. So, Haley, thanks so much for doing this. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Kevin. Thanks you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. We always start in the Tiki Bar with the same first question. What did you want to be when you were a little kid, when you grew up?
I think the first job that I ever wanted to have, this would be when I was really, really little. I think I wanted to be a veterinarian at some point, which ended up tracking, have a dog that I love now. I think then following that, I always kind of knew that I wanted to get into the sales and marketing space. But early on, I think it was a veterinarian.
Oh, okay. And so you have one dog now. What's your dog's name? What type?
Her name is Rue. She's an Aussie Doodle. She's usually sitting right back here on this couch behind me for most of my calls, but she's not here today.
We'll do a separate interview with her.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that. I love that. All right. So you wanted to be a veterinarian, and you grew up in Seattle area?
No, I actually didn't. My family's all from here, but I moved around a lot growing up. I spent most of my early childhood in Cincinnati, Ohio, spent most of my high school right outside of Baltimore, Maryland, but moved around, lived in Danville, San Francisco for a little while, spent a little bit of time in Manhattan, but then came out to Seattle to go to University of Washington. And most of my family lives out here, so it's been home ever since.
Oh wow. Okay, I missed that in my research. So what did you think about moving around like that as a kid? Did that jostle you, or were you game for it?
No, I actually surprisingly was game for it. I think because we kind of had a home base from an extended family standpoint in Seattle, I was always traveling around a lot. And I think it actually has really helped both from the standpoint of being able to be really agile and take change on and actually like change a lot in my career and in my personal life now. It's also just given me a lot of different perspectives. I can instantly relate or understand different perspectives, different people when I meet them from different areas of the country or even internationally. So I really appreciate how I grew up from that standpoint.
What was the first paying job that you ever had?
Oh my gosh. The first paying job, I worked at a golf club doing a mix of kind of pool attendants and golf cart girl very early on.
Nice.
It was really fun. It was a good experience. I think I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I wanted to start making money really early on. And then my first like real internship, if you will, was working actually at Cosmopolitan Magazine in New York on the publishing side, which is the sales side for large magazines. And that was just an incredible experience that I think shaped a lot of the direction that I went in.
So pool attendant versus bev cart person. Did you have a
Yeah,
preference between the two?
we made more money on the bev carts though.
I had a feeling that was going to be your answer. Vice president of sales at Highspot's going to have that answer. So you go to the University of Washington, and
Mhm.
it's easy to imagine why anybody who's seen the sailboats in the football games, and if you have the family base there, it's like
Yeah,
this is one of the great
tailgating.
places. Did you have a career path in mind when you went there? What were you thinking?
Well, I was kind of surrounded growing up by a lot of people in the sales and marketing space. So I always had a sense that I wanted to go down the business route, but I don't think I knew exactly kind of what path I wanted to take. I'm bucketing those together, which is kind of ironic because they're so completely different in so many ways. But I think I always knew that I wanted to go down the business route. I had a lot of interest in, kind of communication psychology, which, as I've now learned in my career, those are all critical things to really understand to be successful in business. So I think that all made sense looking back. But one of the really cool things that University of Washington had was a sales certificate program. I always complain that, it's not something that you can major in at most universities, although it's one of the most common professions
Yeah.
that are out there. So I think University of Washington for a very long time has had a really incredible sales program there. And so not only did I participate in that, but it's also been something that I've, continued to kind of give back to and partner with for internships, mentorships, going and speaking at those programs or at their MBA programs. So I really like what they're doing there from a business standpoint.
That's got to be a good feeling, getting back in front of the class
I
and
love it.
seeing.
I love it.
Absolutely. And you started your career with some consumer brands. You mentioned, I think you just mentioned Cosmopolitan Magazine. I see CoverGirl, Coca-Cola. How
Yeah.
did those early experiences shape you? What do you remember about cutting your teeth in the working world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because on the marketing side in consumer brands or in CPG, the marketing organizations and the marketing leaders at those companies are, the best marketers in the world. So I think, that was a really incredible experience to learn kind of what the best marketing in the world looks like at those organizations. When I graduated, what I really needed to decide and what I wanted to do is really just learn as much as possible and get into kind of early leadership development, kind of rotational type program, which at the time, most of those were through consumer product companies. You look at a Pepsi, a Coca-Cola, E&J Gallo, those are a lot of the organizations that were building out these kind of rotational sales programs to, develop early in career, future leadership talent. And so that was one of the reasons that I wanted to go into CPG is just really learn, as much as possible. And I did, I was doing everything from, stocking the back room of grocery stores to meeting with, executives, doing, tours of the high profile territories and the areas. So, really got some hands-on experience. But I think one of the things that, really stood out to me is because I kind of had this blend of marketing and sales. I would say like I have a mind of a marketer, but heart of sales. And so I kind of combined those two things together is that I saw at these large organizations is that they just didn't necessarily talk to each other very well. And you saw this massive disconnect between marketing and sales and how that impacts the customer or the buying experience. And, that was something that really always then resonated with me so that when I heard about the problem that Highspot was looking to solve, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's a sales and marketing alignment problem. Although at that point in time, I didn't have any SaaS or technology experience or background, I deeply felt the problem that our founders were looking to solve, and that was something that was really exciting. So, I think CPG is hard work. It's no joke. So it instilled a lot of grit. I got yelled at a lot. So cold calling was like, I was like, oh, I'm not even face to face with them. This is great. So I think it just instilled a lot of a strong work ethic.
Can you take me through? I have to ask if there's any stories from stocking the grocery stores because I actually think we were technically colleagues at Coca-Cola for a moment because I
Oh
had
my
an
gosh.
internship with a company called Honest Tea.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I remember that well.
And so they were acquired by Coca-Cola, and I was a summer intern, and it was my job to drive all over Los Angeles and try to promote this tea. So I
I
would like go
remember
to
it.
food festivals or sit in Whole Foods and
Yep.
like give out samples and stuff like that. So I'm curious if you have any war stories.
Yes, I mean lots. Yeah. So basically in the rotational program, you go and basically get experience in all of the different kind of formats that they have. So whether that's, working with, convenience stores or restaurants or more festival type things, or the particular story that I'm thinking of is when you're working large store format, so grocery stores, so think like a Kroger or a Fred Meyer, Walmart, larger stores. And technically, we were not supposed to drive the forklifts in the role that I was in. You have to be certified to do that. But when you're in the back room of a Fred Meyer and have the, backroom manager screaming at you that, you have 4 pallets of 2 liters that need to be moved to a different space in the grocery store, you just figure out a way to make it happen. So I took it upon myself to use the forklift and was very unsuccessful in doing that. And so I remember I actually drove a forklift into a pallet of 2-liter Fanta soda and it exploded everywhere. You can imagine it was like orange Fanta exploding everywhere. And it was sitting next to this bay of like onions. And I just remember afterwards, I was like, I don't even know what to do at this point. And I remember the store manager was just looking at me. He was just like, clean it up, like whatever. And it's funny because it ended up being like, this guy was notorious for being the meanest, grumpiest guy. You could never get a good sale there. It was really hard to get placements out in front of the store. And I remember from that moment, I just handled it, cleaned it up, fixed the problem. That guy loved me from then on. He was so nice to me. He ended up being like a big, supporter. I ended up getting a really big deal done in that store. And I think it was just, a good lesson in that. I always remember when I was building the SDR team at Highspot and teaching people, cold calling and prospecting strategies. I was like, the person who yells at you, if you can turn them around, they can oftentimes end up being your best customer. which I experienced many additional times later in my career. But it's just a lesson on, how to work with people. And just because you mess up doesn't mean it's over. You have to figure out how to fix it and get back on the horse.
It's not how you drive the forklift, it's how you clean up the mess.
Yeah,
I
it
love
wasn't a
that.
nightmare though.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Okay, so you tease this. You hear about this company called Highspot. You join as employee 14 is what I'm gathering from my
Yeah, it was
research.
pretty much our founders and a bunch of our engineers, and we didn't really have a go-to-market team at that time, so it was a very exciting time to join.
And so how is it pitched to you? How do you hear about it? I think you joined as an SDR. Like, do you have any apprehension about taking an SDR role at that time, given the
Yeah, it
uncertainty of
was
what it was
kind
going to
of
be?
like it was kind of SDR, figure it out, go prospect. We don't really know. I think we just done our Series A couple of weeks before. And yeah, I mean, I think, what's really interesting about it is that the vision that our founders had at that time has actually remained, very, very true to what it was originally. Of course, there's been so much evolution and everything that's happened in the market and with AI and everything, it's evolved tremendously. And by no means is the product then what it is today. It's completely evolved. But really, at the end of the day, when you think about the problem that we're looking to solve, yes, it's an enablement platform, but at that time, enablement wasn't even a word that people used as a title, as a function, as a discipline. It was really about, hey, most companies are building product or selling something, whether it's services, product, whatever it may be. And most companies have this fundamental problem of a challenge of getting their go-to-market teams, marketing, sales, operations, partner, whatever it may be, aligned and moving in the same direction to execute on whatever the vision and what the strategy is. The minute that I heard that vision very early on, I think from my previous experience in both marketing and sales at large Fortune 100 organizations, it resonated with me instantly. And that's still the exact same today. And so I think that, when I joined, one of the things that had really helped me, if you will, is that especially in our business, you have to deeply understand the personas and what marketing cares about versus what sales cares about versus what operations and finance and all these different personas. And they're actually quite different. And if you're trying to solve an alignment problem between those functions, you have to understand how to build product, how to sell product, how to service those customers based on their unique needs. And so I think, again, that different experience and the ability to have kind of a wide range or context switch quite a bit helped me a lot early on when, building out our go-to-market strategy, building out the
Yeah.
architecture really of our go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, I mean that's awesome that you could kind of perceive that vision from like such a young age. Was there a memorable deal that you closed, or a moment that you remember in those really early days of selling where you're like, okay, I'm good at this. This is for me.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, it was so interesting. In the early days, I was doing both selling and very quickly growing a large SDR and then AE team. It was like, we were hiring, I don't even know, I think like 5 a month, so 15 a quarter. While I was doing the AE role. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple. I think, there was obviously the first deal that I personally closed was a memorable milestone. I think one very memorable moment where I think not just I've got it, but we've got it as an organization is when we closed Salesforce as a customer and as an investor in Highspot. I think, it's not typical that they'll buy software outside of the software that they build. And so it's a pretty big deal, especially when they're buying it globally for all of their sellers or any customer facing team. So I think and they're still a customer today. They're still an investor. They're a strategic partner of ours. So I think that was a really big milestone and moment, not only for me, but for the business as a whole.
Makes sense. Do you think it's so you'd sold into other companies before, and now you're selling to sales and revenue? I'll call them revenue broadly organizations. You think they're easier on salespeople? So you think they're easier to sell into, or you think they're more difficult to sell into?
I mean, I personally enjoy it. I personally like it. I think that, I have a background in operations, analytics, sales. And so that persona, if you will, tends to be very analytical, straight to the point, no sugarcoating. I think that maybe for some people that are earlier in their sales career, that can be a little scary or abrupt or, intimidating. I personally love it. I think it's, what you see is what you get. But at the same time, we're also working with, enablement and marketing personas that have a very different personality than what you'd get from a sales or operations persona. So I think, again, the ability to pivot or context switch is critically important.
No, that makes sense. And so, I mean, looking at your LinkedIn, you obviously were trusted by the company. You start moving into leadership roles really early. What surprised you most when you moved into a leadership role for the first time?
What surprised me most? I think that I think a lot of different leaders have a lot of different styles. And obviously, I got mentorship and guidance from a lot of leaders within and without outside of Highspot. I think that what surprised me the most is that some leaders have an expectation that you still don't have to do the role effectively when you're leading the team, and that some leaders, I think there's a confusion with delegation and still being in the details. And for me, I'm someone that really goes deep and wide. So a lot of breadth and depth to how I lead, not micromanaging by any means, but I think that it's critically important that leaders are in the details, can do the job that, they're asking their teams to do, or at least well enough to understand what's working, what's not working, how to support, how to advocate. And I think when I got into leadership roles, I would see a lot of, peers, again, like maybe even outside of Highspot, that are like, oh, I have a person that does that for me, or I don't know what's going on in that part of the business, or I can't necessarily do that. And I think just my natural nature, I'm extremely curious. I'm very detail oriented. I want to make sure that I, have an understanding of the depth and breadth of all the teams that I'm leading. I mean, at one time I was leading enablement, operations, analytics, and our SDR team, like a 250, 300 person org. There's a lot of breadth to that and a lot of variation between, a technical data team and a SDR team that's prospecting. And I still think that even in that role, it's very important to be able to go deep into the details of all of those areas.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That balance is difficult to strike, but like super, super important to strike. And so you scaled the account development team is what I'm calling it. Is what I see online, from like, I think it was from 1 to 40 plus people in like 2 years. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what your biggest lesson or takeaway was of that sort of like extreme pace of scaling up people in such a short amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, it was in that time period, 1 to 42. I think at one point in time we were up to 150 globally. So, I mean, the need to scale was massive. I mean, that's when all companies were kind of a growth at all costs, just more. And so, you at that time you couldn't hire fast enough. I think, you really have to, first and foremost, have a very, very intentional hiring strategy. I think it's, your people pipeline is just as important as your revenue pipeline. And so we did a ton of work and had some great leaders on that account development or sales development team that built really strong relationships with universities, with other organizations. And then once you get them in the door, you have to set them up for success to hit the ground running very quickly. So, it was that was actually what led me into getting into leading the enablement team internally at Highspot, right? So I'm, hiring 5 people a month, scaling the team insanely quickly. You've got to have a really good onboarding and enablement strategy to get these people as productive as possible, as fast as possible. And so I was building out our own enablement strategy internally while selling an enablement platform. And so it was, became our customer zero or our Highspot on Highspot strategy. And I think, really at the end of the day, you have to have a systematic way of both onboarding and ongoing enablement to ensure that people have the foundational knowledge and skills, but also that when you want to roll out new initiatives, like we were launching new features and capabilities every 6 to 8 weeks. How do you make sure that everyone's up to date on the new messaging, the new positioning, the new product capabilities? And so that was incredibly important as we scaled. But I think outside of that, you have to really have a good leadership pipeline as well. I mean, I think that's one of the things that made us incredibly successful is how do you build a leadership development program that builds top talent I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in my time at Highspot is that most of our most successful people across many of our go-to-market functions, services, AM, sales engineering, came through that program that we built. And now there are top performers across all areas of the business. And that's not just, hire them and see where they go in the business. There's a lot of intention that goes behind that, and making sure that you have a structured program to help them grow within your organization.
No, I love that. I noticed that when I was just looking at some of your sales team and kind of their trajectory. I
Yeah,
went
they keep
through, I went through a similar program at a company called NetSuite, and
yeah,
tons of my friends still work there. The people who
they have a
hired
great
me still
program.
work there. And I'm just curious how you were able to kind of keep people, for lack of a better phrase, like during that time in the tech
Yeah.
industry. There's a lot of opportunities for someone who started at a company like Highspot and they're successful at Highspot. All of a sudden you can say, okay, the grass is greener. I've done it here, and now there's all
Mhm.
these other opportunities that open up to me. But your people, for a large part, have stayed more than others that I've looked at. And so I'm curious, what's the secret sauce?
Yeah, and it's crazy because it feels like, a lot of people have, moved on more recently, but it's so funny. I'll see like 8 years at Highspot, 6 years at Highspot. I'm like, wow, that's a great run. It's pretty incredible to see. And, I think really at the end of the day, you have to have someone that's helping, when you get someone that's right out of college and they're like, oh, I'm going to go be an SDR, they don't know what they want to do next. Like, it's just, it's an entry point into the organization, but you have to have a way to get them exposure and experience to different parts of the business. I mean, I remember interviewing some people and I was like, you're going to be a sales engineer one day. I just know that that's what you're going to be. Or you're going to be on our services team one day, right? And so you have to really be able to identify that and then create those paths, whether it's through different, rotational programs, whether it's through different projects, whether it's through mentorship, whatever it may be, to give them that exposure so that they get that experience. I think a lot of SDR or even just early in career sales programs, it's like the direction that you can go is become a more senior seller. And that's just not realistic for a lot of people. I mean, again, I had people go into operations, enablement, services, sales engineering, AE, like you name it, all marketing, all across our go to market organization. And I think the positive of it too is you have people in all of those functions that have been an SDR or an earlier in career seller. Like now you have a lot of synergy across the different functions across your organization. They have customer empathy, they have customer experience, they have the grit if they've been through cold calling. So I just think it's one of the best roles. But oftentimes, if it's just the only path that you can go is becoming an AE, I think it's just very short sighted of organizations to think that that's the only path that you can go.
I love that. They've all driven the proverbial forklift at some point,
Yeah,
and can
exactly.
share stories. So that makes time.
I would joke with the SDRs, I'm like, you haven't had to lift a forklift. I'm like, oh God, I sound old now. That's crazy.
So I want to ask next about, you mentioned the role where you became VP of enablement, operations, analytics, and then you're also running the SDR program. And
Yep.
so what is the hardest personal learning part of that whole equation? I imagine you're picking up a lot of this stuff because you're just in extreme scale and you're sort of doing a little bit of all of this. But when you step into
Mhm.
that role, that's a huge team, that's distinct areas of responsibility. What was the hardest thing for you to have to learn?
I mean, I think the hardest thing, not hard in a bad way, but I always say every role that I've had at Highspot was the first time I've had that role, right? And so it's like, oh, go lead the analytics team. Had I led an analytics team before? No. And in some areas, I was criticized for that. In other areas, it was, hey, this is someone that can, learn, is curious, hires really great people, can figure out the strategy and get us to that next level of growth, which we did. So I think that it's not necessarily hard in the sense that it couldn't be done. I think that's actually where I thrive, what I love. If I'm not learning something new, then I get bored very quickly. And I'm someone that can very quickly get my hands into a topic, figure it out, and then connect the execution to the strategy. But I think that's probably the hardest part about it is, learning it as you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I'm curious what tools you put in your tool belt to kind of especially make sure you're becoming a better leader over that time, because you've been almost a decade growing Highspot as a leader. And I'm curious how your leadership journey specifically has evolved as you've taken on, starting with these young sales teams to more operational areas, technical areas, major customers. Like, How do you continue to improve the leadership piece?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been told by a good mentor that I've had is that you're once you get to a certain level of leadership, your strengths and your weaknesses end up becoming the same thing, and you have to find a balance and a middle ground between them, and you can't be extreme on either end. So I think that shifting from very early 10 years ago to a frontline leader to being a third, fourth, fifth line leader leading large organizations globally, it's a very different leadership style that you have to have. It's a lot more of developing the strategy, creating the vision, giving people context, creating an organization that has very clear expectations on the goals that they're working towards, as opposed to, sitting side by side with someone and getting the job done with them. Now, I love doing that, and I still do that in many ways, but I think, the lessons in going to multi levels of leadership and having a lot of breadth, I think you really have to be someone, at least in the role that I was in, that can context switch and have a lot of range. I mean, truly, like, think about going from presenting on stage to 5,000 people, to developing our sales kickoff strategy, to helping build out what the board strategy deck is going to look like, and what our trailing 12 win rates are, right? It's a lot of context switching. And so I think that when you do that, you have to show up to each group that you're working with and not make them feel like you are context switching. They just need to know that you are there in that particular domain with them and have a clear vision of how to make them successful. And so I think, that was one of the things that I had to learn, is you really have to think about your team as, almost your customer, your buyer, instead of giving them, the full visibility into all the stuff going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm curious how you think about the evolution of the enablement space and just why it keeps you coming back. You mentioned you're really curious. I would imagine different things have popped up for you. I actually saw that you were tweeting about HubSpot's, or excuse me, Highspot's AI capabilities in
Mhm.
2017, which I think is pretty interesting. So you've lived this as a customer, you've built it internally, you've been selling in the market. I'm curious how the evolution of what you're actually touching from a market standpoint has kept you intrigued.
Well, it's kind of funny because if I go back to the early days where enablement wasn't even really again, like a term or a title, like you didn't see an SVP, revenue enablement, like you see at most large organizations today. And the funny thing is, even when that wasn't the case 10 years ago, all companies were enabling their teams in some form or fashion, right? It's like, it just didn't mean that there was a dedicated function to do it. So I think that ironically, the journey that we've kind of gone through is that, there, over the past couple of years now, the enablement discipline and function, like team of people, has become a very, more mature type discipline. And there's, a team of people doing it. There's a strategy, there's best practices, there's some incredible enablement leaders that are out there in the industry. But what's actually really interesting right now, especially everything that's happening within the AI space, the market dynamics, is the conversation that I'm always having with our largest strategic customers is that enablement is everyone's job. It's not just a dedicated function. And when you think about it that way, if you take something like coaching as an example, it's always been seen that, frontline managers do the coaching. Well, why is that? Like, there's a lot of ways that you can get coached, a lot of people that can be coaching you in any scenarios, whether that's a human being or whether that's, AI that's giving you feedback on a call that you had, or prepping you for a conversation based on a similar deal and someone that's had success based on that similar deal. So I think the space that it's going is almost back to something where it's enablement is everyone's job, and it's not just a discipline, but it's a thing that you do in the organization. There's many ways that that can be done through programmatic strategies or through leveraging AI to ultimately, at the end of the day, just help people become better at what they're supposed to do to hit their number. That's really all it is. And I think that that's a really exciting place for us to be in, because now it's not just going to be, oh, hey, what's our enablement strategy? Let's go talk to the enablement team. Now it's going to be, hey, enablement is something that is really a competitive differentiator for us. And enablement defined as, what's our change management strategy to make our teams more successful? And that can be done at massive scale through leveraging AI. And you're right, we've been in the AI space for many, many years. But I do think that, a lot of what's happening with generative AI and agentic AI is really going to change the game on how companies think about enabling, not just their enablement teams.
Absolutely. I love that. What is maybe a book or a piece of content, podcast, whatever it is that you like to recommend to people? And bonus points if it's not related to work or go to market stuff.
That's a good one. I would probably say, I don't know, there's a good, I have to get the name of it. There's a good book that I read. It is more sales related recently, but it takes a very kind of engineering mindset to selling. I'll have to get the name and we can put it in the chat of it.
We'll put it in the notes. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, then, actually, give me 1 sec. I was going to pause because that was going to be my last question, but let me think of another last one. All right. If I just ask you, this isn't me asking it, I'll ask it in a second. If I kind of ask like how you're staying up to date on AI tooling and things like that, because you kind of referenced it like personally,
Yeah.
is that comfortable? Okay.
Yeah, the like 16.
I can ask it more broadly like that. Like what are you most excited to learn about now?
Yeah.
Or I could ask you about AI specifically, whichever you prefer.
Either one, totally. The answer more broadly would probably be AI, so that works.
You mentioned, integrating the new AI tooling. I'm curious how you yourself are staying up to date on the changing technical landscape that's happening under us.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's not something that's totally new for me. So I think the learning curve isn't as like jarring or high. But I think it's something that's absolutely critical. So I mean, honestly, I'm staying up to date through Highspot, both in our product, through how we're using it internally, but also it's something that's just now woven into my personal life, my professional life in every way possible. And I do think that people, and the advice that I always give is you do have to set aside time to really go deep and learn about what's happening in the space, especially because it's moving so quickly. If you're just kind of sitting back and waiting for it to come to you, you're going to get left behind. And so I've taken, a lot of time, whether it's advising for companies that are deeply investing in AI to understand kind of what's cutting edge, what a lot of the early stage startups are doing, or whether it is actually just getting my hands on a lot of the products myself and using them either personally or professionally. But you really do have to be intentional about it if you don't want to get left behind.
You got to drive the forklift. I appreciate
Yes.
that. Haley, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We'll be excited to post all this and, of course, share links to your LinkedIn and your Twitter, and we'll get that book recommendation from you. But I'm super grateful and would love to do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. It was great speaking with you.
Stop.